Princess Yara looked her human guard in the eyes, keyed the outer bolt from both sides of the gate, and left him on the Stormlash platform to die. He was Len Drake, a word the translator rendered with the faint embarrassment of someone forced to say mud in a language built for music. He had been assigned to the outer gate of the Crimson Citadel, not because anyone had asked for him, but because a treaty clause demanded one human at the princess's door. Sale of the Resonant Hall, the Citadel's marshal of intelligence, had logged him as culturally archaic and operationally negligible. She had watched the princess seal the gate herself. She had not lifted a hand. By dawn, Sale would walk to that outer platform expecting a corpse. She would stop counting bodies at 32, and she would not yet know about the other 3 inside. The air in the command bunker of the Crimson Citadel tasted of copper, burned ozone, and cold reactor oil. 6 hours before the storm, everything about the human was still a joke. Sale watched him walk through the arch of the Sovereign Court and felt her secondary chords tighten in something close to embarrassment. Not for him, for the treaty that had forced him upon them. The Vrethai sovereignty stood 800 generations old. Its citadels sang, its walls listened. The Crimson Citadel of the outer coast had been carved from a single vein of iron quartz by voice alone, 6,000 years before the first human satellite ever left low orbit. And into its throne hall, the treaty had delivered a broad-shouldered creature in patched fatigues, carrying a canvas duffel and a wooden-handled axe. He did not bow. He did not seem to know he was expected to. "Sergeant Drake," the herald sang, with the softest tremor of apology in his voice, "human envoy of the Terran Concord, assigned to the outer gate." The court did not laugh. The court had too many centuries of manners for that. Instead, 100 pairs of translucent eyes swiveled toward him with the same faint dismay one gave to a farm animal wandered onto polished stone. Princess Yara did not rise from her divan. She did not even turn her head. Her attendants pretended not to see him at all. Sile made her official log entry that same evening in the private chamber of the intelligence wing. Subject: Drake, Len, human. Age: 31 standard cycles. Origin: Kepler's Reach. Category 2 mining colony, heavy gravity. Assessed threat profile: culturally archaic, operationally negligible. Recommendation: rotate to ceremonial post at earliest opportunity. Do not brief on internal court matters. She closed the file and did not think about it again. The armory sergeant filed a note the next morning that Sile also did not read. Sergeant Drake reported for weapons issue. Available inventory exhausted for foreign personnel this cycle. Issued human personal effects only. 1 tungsten core bolt launcher, 6-shot capacity, personal weapon. 1 wood-handled cutting implement, personal weapon. 1 whetstone. No plasma sidearm authorized. No powered armor allocated. See supply request pending. At the end of the sergeant's note, the human had signed his own initials in ink and written a single word beneath: adequate. Sile found that word months later when the record mattered and stared at it for a long time. The storm came in from the northern Gulf on the 8th evening. Meteorology called it a Class 9 ionic surge. Sale, who read weather reports the way soldiers read enemy dispositions, called it a curtain. A curtain of green lightning and iron dust that would drop the outer sensor grid, deafen the coastal listening posts, and most importantly, ionize the atmosphere around the citadel to a density at which plasma weapons discharged into the air itself, cooked their own emitters within 40 seconds, and became fine, expensive paperweights. 3 centuries earlier, a smaller storm had killed a Vrethai regent because his elite guard had been unable to fire a single shot for the 6 minutes it took the assassins to reach him. Sale had prepared. She had ordered lance batteries pre-cycled. She had staged one-time chemical charges at every arrow slit. She had briefed every officer in the citadel on the fallback plan. She had not briefed the human. He did not need briefing on his own weapon. His weapon did not use plasma. At the top of the 8th hour, the auxiliary intelligence station chimed an anomaly across her console. Movement, northern approach, small, dispersed, moving under storm cover. Between 6 and 7 signatures, resolving, then 12, then 22, then 35. The signatures did not resolve into shapes on the thermal band. That itself was the resolution. Only one organization in the known cluster fielded operatives whose thermal profile could be dampened to the exact temperature of a wet rock at midnight. The Hollow Choir. Sael was already halfway out of her chair. The Hollow Choir did not accept low-value contracts. The Hollow Choir did not commit 35 knives to a single target unless the target was somebody the client wanted to disappear, as if she had never sung. The Princess. Sael keyed her chords across the internal channel and spoke 5 words in the private cadence reserved for court crisis. Sanctum, now, full seal. Yara's answering chord was cold. Confirmed. Sael reached the Sanctum antechamber in 3 minutes flat. She was 6 paces from the outer gate console when she saw the Princess standing there alone, one long silver hand already resting on the manual bolt. The gate stood open. Beyond it, on the storm-lashed platform of the outer parapet, Len Drake stood in his patched fatigues, tungsten launcher across his chest, water running in sheets down the shaven planes of his face. He was looking in. He and the Princess had a conversation of about 4 heartbeats' length. Sael could not hear it over the wind. She saw only Yahara's chin lift a fraction and Len's mouth move once. Later, Sael would piece together, from lip-reading of the platform camera, that he had said, "Mom, go inside. I've got the door." The Princess did not answer with a word. She looked him in the eyes, keyed the outer bolt from both sides of the gate, and walked past Sael without a glance toward the sanctum. Sael caught her sleeve before her cords could stop themselves. "Princess." Yara did not turn her head. Her voice was flat. "The clause requires a human at the outer gate. Let the human be at the outer gate." The seal fired. 6 tons of anchor bolts slid home. On the outside, the storm swallowed the sound. Sael stood at the console for one long, silent moment. Then she walked very deliberately to the command post, sat down in front of the platform feed, and did what an intelligence marshal did when a piece of the board had just moved in a way she did not understand. She began to watch. The first assassin came over the eastern lip of the parapet at 9 minutes past the top of the storm. The Hollow Choir did not climb, technically. It flowed. Their body cover suits absorbed light and heat, dispersed silhouette, and let them move up sheer stone in a rippling motion that some Vrethai poets had once compared to spilled ink running the wrong direction. On the platform feed, the operative appeared as an oil-dark ripple against wet iron. Len had his back turned to that side of the parapet. He was checking the loads on his launcher. He was, from every visible metric, unaware. Sael, watching the feed, opened her mouth to send the warning through his personal channel. She did not get the syllable out. The launcher came up. It came up in a single fluid motion, without a turn, without a sighting pause, without the barrel dip a Vrethai marksman used to correct for wind. The human simply pivoted at the waist and fired, once, from the low hip position over his own shoulder. The tungsten bolt was the width of Sael's smallest finger and traveled at a velocity for which the Vrethai language did not have a native noun. It struck the assassin's plasma shield head-on. In every simulation Sael had ever run, in every history book she had ever read, that was where the shot ended. Plasma shields ate kinetic projectiles for a living. They dispersed the kinetic energy. They dumped the heat. They laughed. The bolt went straight through. It hit the assassin at the base of the throat. It exited between the shoulders. It punched a fist-sized hole in the citadel wall behind him. The assassin fell backward off the parapet without a sound, because his throat was no longer connected to his lungs, and there was nothing left to make a sound with. Len Drake reloaded that chamber, dropped the spent tungsten sleeve into a canvas pouch on his belt, and turned his back to that side of the parapet again. He had never looked. He had heard the ripple. In the command post, Sayle's lieutenant of watch, a young officer with the polished chords of an aristocratic house, made a small, involuntary sound in the back of his throat. It was not a word. It was the sound a Vrethai made when a thing that could not happen had just happened in front of him. Sayle did not turn her head. She said quietly, "Bring me his personnel file, all of it, from the Terran Concord archive, and bring me my terminal." The lieutenant scrambled to obey. The second assassin came over the western lip 40 seconds later. Len shot him from behind in the base of the skull without turning. The third came up the ladder from the sea approach. He dropped him with the axe, one strike right where the neck met the collarbone. The axe head buried 3 fingers deep, and Len set his boot on the man's chest and rocked the blade free like a farmer freeing a stubborn root. Sayle watched him wipe the axe blade on the assassin's sleeve and slip the whetstone from his pocket for 2 brief passes down the edge. 2 brief passes in a storm, with 4 more assassins already flowing up the walls. The whole command post had gone quiet behind her, not silent, quiet. The particular quiet of a room in which every person had just realized that they were not, in fact, sure who the most dangerous entity within 100 meters was anymore. The lieutenant returned with the file. Sayle opened the personnel file on the terminal and began to read. She read it aloud because her lieutenant had crept up beside her and was staring, and because reading a file aloud in the intelligence wing was the traditional method of forcing yourself to believe what was written on it. Drake, Len, Terran Concord Marine, rated infantry, extraction specialist, born Kepler's Reach mining colony, heavy gravity classification 1.4 Terran standard, assigned ore shaft lift operator, age 15. She stopped. Age 15, she said again, in 1.4 gravity. The lieutenant did not say anything. Sayle's cords did the calculation for him. In 1.4 gravity, at age 15, a growing human spine compressed by an average of 6% over a 5-year working span. Joint cartilage densified. Cardiac muscle over-thickened. The endocrine system rebuilt the skeleton in bands of denser bone. It was not exercise. It was industrial-grade remodeling. She scrolled on. Emergency contact, Sister Emma Drake. Shaft 17, Kepler's Reach, resident nurse's aide. Payroll allocation, 60%. She stopped again. 60% of his pay, she said. To a nurse's aide in a mining shaft. The lieutenant hesitantly said, "A large family, Marshal." "A nurse's aide in a mining shaft," Sayle repeated, "does not have a large family. She is what a mining shaft has instead of a hospital." She did not know how she knew that. She had read too many old Terran reports over too many quiet years. "He is paying for medical care, for someone, in a shaft." She scrolled. Service record, extraction team specialist, Terran Concord 2nd Expeditionary, deployments. Her secondary cord went dry in her throat. 11 combat deployments in 9 years. Karst Basin, Vergen Delta, the Meridian Beach Recovery, the Old Rush Pass, the 2nd Boreal. She stopped. "The 2nd Boreal," she said again. The lieutenant did not understand. He had not read Terran military history. Sayle had. The 2nd Boreal extraction had been a rescue operation in a canyon at -50 Terran standard, in a blizzard, in the teeth of an insurgent siege, in which one Terran Marine platoon had brought out 41 civilians alive over 8 days on foot. Only 4 of the platoon had come back. Of those 4, one had returned to duty within a month, wearing a citation ribbon and refusing to speak of what had happened. Sayle scrolled to the citation ribbons on Len Drake's file. The 2nd Boreal ribbon was there. She scrolled on. Medical assessments, pain tolerance, outlier, cold tolerance, unclassified, note from examining physician. She read the note. Note reads, quote, "Subject completed field cauterization of a punctured femoral artery on himself using a soldering iron and a mouthful of surgical thread, then walked 4 kilometers to the extraction point. Do not classify as unusual. This is standard for his home world." End quote. The command post was so quiet she could hear the storm outside. She closed the file. She sat very still for 1 full minute. Then, in a voice so soft the lieutenant had to lean in to hear it, she said, "We assigned a second boreal survivor to a ceremonial doorpost." The lieutenant said nothing. "We logged him," she said, "as culturally archaic." The lieutenant, wisely, still said nothing. Sael turned back to the platform feed. Len Drake was crouched beside the 4th assassin, going through the man's belt pouches with the calm, patient hands of a man doing an inventory at a supply shed. He looked up, once, directly at the camera she had thought concealed. He held up something small and dark for the lens to see. Then he flicked it into the sea. Sael's throat did something her language did not have a word for. He knew about the camera. He had known the entire time. The dead man's tracker was gone. The hollow choir would have to trust their own count in a storm in the dark. Sael pressed the private channel chime on her console. It was the first time in the 8 days of his assignment she had opened his line. She said, in careful, unmusical Terran standard, "Sergeant Drake, this is Marshal Sael, report." There was a pause. In the pause, a 5th assassin came over the parapet, took 2 steps toward him, and lost his head to the axe. Len wiped the blade on the man's sleeve, and then, quite calmly, in the accent of a mining colony, answered her. "Marshal, situation is 30 to go. Dry powder, 28 bolts remaining in inventory. Storm holds another 6 hours. I'd like a floor plan of the interior." Sael blinked. "The interior?" "Yes, ma'am. The interior is sealed. Yours is the outer gate. The threat is at the outer gate." "Ma'am," Len said, "the interior is where the other 3 are hiding." Sael went cold from her sternum outward. "The other 3? "Only 22 profiles came over the wall," Len said, patient as a schoolteacher. "The hollow choir sends full teams. A full team on a target this size is 35. 3 of them are in the Citadel already. Have been for a while. I'd like a map, please, ma'am." Sael did not answer. Sael turned to her lieutenant. Her lieutenant had already opened his data crystal and was cross-referencing the entry logs of the last 6 lunar cycles. She said quietly, "Give me every entrance since the last audit. Every one." The lieutenant, whose hands were shaking, began to sing the data. Sael watched him work through the 9th assassin while the lieutenant read her the entry manifests. Len used the second-to-last tungsten bolt, not on a body, but on a shield generator 2 of the assassins had brought up between them as a moving wall. The bolt punched through the emitter housing at an angle. The generator strobed once and detonated with a soft ionic thump that filled the platform with white gas and did the assassins' work of blindness for them. Len walked into the cloud, unhurried. The axe went twice. He came out again, with fresh blood on his forearms and a fresh notch in the axe head he would sharpen out later. Sael, watching, did not know precisely why she was so unable to look away. She had watched war. She had watched a great deal of war. She had watched her own kind fight, and Vrethi fought beautifully in singing formations, in braids of coordinated fire that resembled ceremonial dances. She had watched the Kellin, who fought as swarms. She had watched the Otari, who fought with terrible cold precision. What she was watching now was none of those things. He was working. That was the word. He was working. He was doing a job that needed to be done, in the manner of a man who had done exactly this kind of job many times before, in weather worse than this, for people less deserving of it than a princess who had locked him out. She was still watching when the lieutenant, in a voice pitched 2 chords under his usual register, said, Marshal, I have something. She turned. 3 names, the lieutenant said. 3 court personnel entered the citadel in the 2 lunar cycles before this storm and did not leave. Their entry codes are legitimate. Their credentials are court-issued. Their identities... He hesitated. Give me the names. Thren of Pale Bark, Sovereignty Marshal, Senior Aide to the Matriarch's Diplomatic Corps. 12 years of service. Access, Gold Tier. Sale did not move. Ale of the Second Chorus, Physician of the Private Household, 6 years. And the third, Vess of the Long Silence, Master of the Sanctum Wardrobe, 19 years. Sile sat very still. The matriarch, whom Sale served with the whole of her cords, spoke Thren of Pale Bark's name every morning without suspicion. She reached very slowly for her private channel to Len Drake. She said, Sergeant? Marshal, there are 3. Thren of Pale Bark, Ale of the Second Chorus, Vess of the Long Silence. She paused. I need you to understand what you are being told. Thren of Pale Bark is a sovereignty marshal. Ale of the Second Chorus has been the personal physician of the royal household for 6 years. Vess of the Long Silence has served the wardrobe of the sanctum since before Princess Yara was hatched. If any one of these people wishes the princess dead, they can be inside her sanctum before you can walk down 2 corridors. Len Drake, on the platform, took a moment to shoot a 10th assassin through the temple with his second-to-last bolt. Then he answered her. Ma'am, he said, I understand. I need the interior ventilation map, and I need someone in the sanctum wing that isn't one of those 3 people. Sael's cords tightened. The princess sealed the sanctum from the inside. Only the matriarch can override the seal from outside. The matriarch is at the winter court. The princess's household staff are the only living people currently inside the sanctum with her. There was the smallest pause on his line. Ma'am, he said quietly, then the princess is already alone with 3 assassins. Sael did not answer immediately. She realized her lieutenant was staring at her. She realized her own hands were flat on the console and trembling in a resonance she had not felt in 20 years. How much time? She said. They'll wait for a signal, Len said. The exterior team was the noise, loud enough to draw all your attention outside. The interior 3 will move when they think you're fully committed at the gate, which will be... He looked up at the storm. Very soon. Sael pressed the internal alert. Command post, silent alert. Sanctum wing, no motion, no cords. No door opens without my direct order. Confirm. The alert confirmed in 3 rings. She turned back to the feed. Sergeant Drake. Ma'am, you cannot open the outer gate. The princess sealed it from both sides. I know, ma'am. You have no interior access. Ma'am, Len said in the same patient, even tone, the ventilation intakes on the north face of the parapet are wide enough for a Vrethi body. That means they're wide enough for me. And they open into the service shaft that runs down the outer sanctum wall. I've been looking at them for 8 days. The command post was silent. Someone at the back took a small step backward from their console, as if physically disengaging from the shape of the situation Sael had gotten them all into. Sael said, Sergeant, that shaft has an inertial pressure valve 2 levels down. It will crush a Vrethi body in 90 seconds. Yes, ma'am. I've been looking at the valve too. I can pin it open with the last of my tungsten sleeves. That gives me about 40 seconds inside the shaft before the sleeves buckle. That's enough. Sael closed her eyes for the smallest moment. You are describing a suicide. No, ma'am, Len said. I'm describing a job. He shot the 11th assassin. The bolt caromed off wet stone and took the man in the ear. Len did not watch him fall. Sael said quietly, Explain to me, Sergeant, why you believe you are still alive to have this conversation. There was a longer pause on his line. Ma'am, Len said finally, we're not invincible. He shot the 12th assassin. We bleed, we break, we die. He picked up the axe. "We just make the other side die faster." He walked into the storm. Sael did not speak for a long time after that. She sat and she watched, and she did what an intelligence marshal did when she had made every calculation wrong. She revised. The lieutenant, at her elbow, watched her watch. He watched Len drop the 13th assassin, and the 14th, and the 15th. He watched Len pull a tungsten sleeve out of the second man he had killed, wipe it clean on the second man's sleeve, and press it back into the launcher's belt. He watched Sael's face do something no one at the intelligence wing had ever seen it do. He said, "Marshal, may I ask a question?" "Ask." "What is Kepler's Reach?" Sael did not turn her head. "Kepler's Reach," she said, "is a mining colony on the second orbit of a cold star at the edge of Terran-mapped space. Category 2, gravity 1.4 Terran standard. Population, at last census, 11,000. Primary export, iron and rare metals. Primary import, food, Terran Concord classification, hardship post." "Hardship post," the lieutenant repeated. "Hardship post," Sael said, "in the Terran vernacular means a place from which children are not evacuated, because there is no ship to evacuate them, and no place to send them if there were. It means a place where the medical clinic and the emergency alarm are the same building. It means a place where the parents send their 15-year-olds to work or lifts because the parents are broken, and if the 15-year-old does not work, the family does not eat." She paused. 60% of pay," she said, "to a nurse's aide in Shaft 17, his sister Emma, on payroll allocation from every deployment for 9 years. The lieutenant did not follow. 9 years of a Marine's pay is a substantial sum, Sael said. It is not sent to a nurse's aide unless the nurse's aide is paying out of her own hands for something the nurse's aide should not be able to pay for. A child. Perhaps not her own. She turned to look at the lieutenant finally, and the lieutenant flinched. "Somewhere in Shaft 17, Sael said, there is a family raising a child, and the money that keeps that child alive comes from an axe and a launcher on a parapet outside our princess's door. That is what we assigned to ceremonial duty. That is what the princess locked outside in the storm." The lieutenant sat down. He had not intended to sit down. He simply did. Sael turned back to the feed. Len Drake had killed the 16th assassin and was crouched over him in the same patient, working posture, going through his pockets. He took out a small square of what looked like folded paper. He opened it. He read it. He folded it again and slid it into a pouch on his belt. Sael keyed the private channel. "Sergeant, report." "Ma'am." "What did the 16th man have in his pocket?" "A schedule, ma'am." His voice over the storm was very even. "A schedule of when the interior signal was to be sent from whom to whom. It's in hollow choir code. I can't read it, but I can count the marks." "How many marks?" 3 signals inbound, 1 signal outbound. The signals are time-stamped. The first inbound is at the 12th mark of the storm. That's in 11 minutes, ma'am. The outbound signal. The outbound signal is the confirmation that the princess is dead. It goes to a sovereignty encryption prefix I don't recognize. But you might. He read the prefix. Sael's secondary chord failed her briefly. She had to breathe through her primary before she could reply. She said, "That prefix is the matriarch's own diplomatic corps." "Yes, ma'am." "The matriarch would not order the death of her own daughter." "No, ma'am, she wouldn't." "Then someone in her diplomatic corps has arranged to receive confirmation of the princess's death from an encrypted channel that will look to any downstream reader like the matriarch's own instrument." "Yes, ma'am. And when that confirmation is received," Sael said slowly, feeling the shape of it, "there will be, within 1 full cycle, a very quiet, very legitimate-looking succession crisis, in which the princess's death will be traced to Terran incompetence at her gate, and the treaty that binds 12 human colony worlds to the sovereignty's defense will be voided." and 12 human worlds will be left without a defense pact against the very people who arranged this. Yes, ma'am. She sat with that. Who benefits? The people, Len said, who want 12 human colony worlds undefended on the eve of a sovereignty succession so that a certain faction inside the diplomatic corps can spend the next 2 cycles arguing that the humans are not worth the risk of the treaty and that the sovereignty's real natural allies are, in fact, an entirely different empire. Sile stared at the feed. Sergeant. Ma'am, how long have you known this? Len did not answer immediately. He shot the 17th assassin, ejected the spent sleeve, and reloaded from his belt. Ma'am, he said, I was assigned to this post because a treaty clause forced my government to give you a body. My government picked me because I asked to be picked. I asked to be picked because Terran Concord Intelligence has been watching the diplomatic core of the sovereignty for 4 cycles. I've been reading hollow choir codes for the same 4 cycles. When the princess sealed the gate this evening, ma'am, she did not seal it because she thought I was expendable. She sealed it because she was told 20 minutes before the storm that a Terran Marine on her gate was here as a spy, and that if she opened the door to me during the storm, she would let a hostile agent into the sanctum. Sale went cold. Who told her that? Ma'am, Len said, the same person who's about to send a message from the matriarch's prefix in 11 minutes. Please have someone check the sanctum wardrobe. Sale made 3 cords fire simultaneously, which was a thing she never did. Her lieutenant flinched. Across the intelligence wing, 3 consoles chimed and 3 officers turned as if hit. Sanctum wardrobe. Verify presence of Vess of the Long Silence. The cord came back in 6 seconds. Marshal, Vess of the Long Silence signed out of the wardrobe office at the 7th mark of the storm, location unlogged. Sale keyed the private channel. Sergeant, Vess of the Long Silence is unaccounted for inside the sanctum. Yes, ma'am. How did you know? How did you? Ma'am, Len said. The person who told the princess I was a spy needed to be someone the princess trusted enough not to double-check. That's a very short list. Vess of the Long Silence dressed her every morning of her life. If there was one voice, she would take at face value in the 20 minutes before a storm. It was his. Sael closed her eyes. She opened them. She said, Sergeant, what do you need? Ma'am, Len said, I need 8 more minutes to finish out here. I need the pressure valve schematic. I need 1 clean channel to the princess that Vess of the Long Silence does not have access to. And I need you to trust me for those 8 minutes, even though you have every reason not to. Sile did something she had not done in her career. She said, confirmed, all 3. She sent him the schematic. She sent him the channel. She watched him kill the 18th assassin. The 18th assassin was the one who nearly killed him. The hollow choir had learned by that point that shooting was useless. The tungsten bolts came through their shields. The axe took their heads. They had learned, moreover, that they could not surround the human because he did not stay in one place. He moved along the parapet in a slow, working rhythm, back and forth, from one killing point to the next, and he had chosen those points himself. Days ago, when Sael had been logging him as culturally archaic. They tried, instead, to overload him. 3 assassins came over the northern lip at the same time. Sael saw Len's shoulders tighten for the first time. He shot the leftmost through the eye with the tungsten. He caught the middle one with the axe backhand at the neck. The rightmost slipped inside his guard, drove a blade through the meat of his thigh and hooked it upward. Len went down on one knee. The axe came out of his hand. It skittered 3 paces across the wet stone. The assassin bore down on him with a short sword. Sael's cord failed her. She heard her own voice make a sound she had not made since she was a fledgling in her first storm. Len caught the short sword on his forearm. He caught it deliberately on the meat of his forearm because his forearm was denser than the sword. The blade sank 2 fingers deep, hit bone, and stopped. The assassin's own momentum carried him forward. Len's other hand came up with a small folding blade Sael had not known he carried, and buried it under the assassin's jaw to the hilt. The assassin died before he understood he was falling. Len rolled him off. He pulled the short sword out of his own forearm. He looked at the wound for one long moment, the way a farrier looks at a horse's hoof. Then he crawled, on his hands and one good knee, to a chemical charge canister staged by the arrow slit, cracked the seal with his teeth and pressed the tip against the puncture in his thigh. He set his back against the wall and pressed the trigger. The canister was a wound cauterization charge Sael had staged for Vrethai casualties. It was calibrated for Vrethai tissue at a temperature that would sear a Vrethai artery closed in 3 seconds. It was calibrated, in other words, at a temperature that Len Drake absorbed for 4 seconds without so much as changing the angle of his jaw. He held the tool against the wound until the artery sealed. He set the tool down. He drew a breath. He said into his open channel, in the same patient voice he had used all night, "Marshal, please tell the physician's office not to be delicate. Fill the hole. It works better that way." Sael did not answer. She was, for the first time in 18 years of service, unable to answer. She watched him get up. He got up in stages, first to his hands, then to one knee, then, with a hand braced against the wall, to both feet. Then, without a hand on the wall, upright. He limped 4 paces, retrieved the axe, tested his weight on the wounded leg, adjusted his stance, and turned back to the parapet. There were 15 assassins left outside. There were 11 minutes to the first interior signal. He killed the 19th assassin. He killed the 20th. He killed the 21st with the last of the tungsten sleeves he had not used to pin the valve, because he had done the calculation and decided he would take a chance on the valve for 1 extra second on his ammunition. He killed the 22nd with the axe and the 23rd with the short sword he had pulled out of his own arm. By the time he came to the vent intake on the north face of the parapet, there were 12 assassins still outside, all of them regrouping behind the last of their shield generators, unwilling to close within the axe's reach. Len had 4 minutes to the first interior signal. He had 1 tungsten sleeve on his belt. He said, "Marshal, I'm going in now. When I go into the shaft, the 12 out here will assume the assassination succeeded and start disengaging. Please try not to shoot them as they leave. I want them to report what happened. I want the client to hear it from their own people." Sael, who had been the Marshal of Intelligence for 18 years and who had never in her career been given tactical orders by anyone from outside her own species, said, "Confirmed." Len wedged the last tungsten sleeve into the pressure valve. He pulled himself into the vent. He disappeared. Sael brought up the interior schematic on her main console and watched him move. The vent shaft ran the height of the sanctum's outer wall, a slick, vertical drop lined with ceramic baffles designed to muffle the noise of the storm. It had never been designed for a body. It had certainly never been designed for a body dragging a wounded leg and an axe. Sael watched the pressure valve indicator swing hard as the tungsten sleeve took the load. She watched it start to bend. 40 seconds, the schematic said. Len fell the first 2 levels rather than climbed them. He hit the first landing on his good leg, absorbed the shock through a bent knee, and kept moving. He passed the second baffle sideways at an angle that no Vrethai spine could have taken. He reached the pressure valve. The tungsten sleeve was bent nearly double. He rolled under it, went to his belly on the far side, and pulled the sleeve out with his teeth. The valve snapped shut behind him with a wet, mechanical thump. If he had been 1 full second slower, it would have taken his feet off. He was, at that point, 3 levels below the sanctum antechamber and 30 seconds from the first interior signal. Sael keyed the private channel to the princess. She had never used this channel in her career. It was a chord protocol designed for exactly 1 scenario. The Marshal of Intelligence has verified information that the princess's household cannot be trusted, and the princess must be spoken to directly, without any staff between them. She sang it. Yara's answering chord was cold and quick. Marshal, Princess, do not open the sanctum door. Do not respond to Vess of the Long Silence. Do not respond to Thren of Palebark. Do not respond to Ale of the Second Chorus. There are 3 hollow choir operatives inside the sanctum with you, and the person who told you the human was a spy is one of them. There was silence on the line. Sael could hear, faintly, the princess's chords cycling through disbelief, then verification, then the small, sharp intake of breath that in a Vrethai meant, "You are correct, and I am now in mortal danger." Yara said, "Where is the human?" "The human," Sael said, "is coming for you. Please stay behind your inner bolt." Yara's cord did something surprising. It softened. "Marshal, tell him I said the outer gate was a locked gate." Sael did not know what that meant. She said, "Confirmed, Princess. I will tell him." She keyed the sergeant. "Sergeant, the princess says the outer gate was a locked gate." Len, at that moment, was pressed to the wall of the 3rd-level service corridor, listening for footsteps in the sanctum antechamber above. He said, "Tell her I heard her. Tell her a locked gate is a locked gate regardless of who did the locking or from which side." Sael relayed it. Ihara, in her sanctum, made a sound Sael had not heard her make in 12 years. It was a small, human sort of sound. It was, Sael realized, a laugh. The first interior signal fired at the 12th mark of the storm, exactly on schedule. It fired from the sanctum wardrobe. Vess of the Long Silence, standing at the door of the wardrobe office, sent the confirmation pulse to the outer team. "Target isolated, move." The outer team on the parapet at that moment was 30 seconds into a bewildered retreat down the sea approach ladders. Having spent an hour watching 35 men die on a stone porch to a single limping human, and no longer having any interest in moving toward anything but their own escape ships. The confirmation pulse went out. No one out there was listening. Ale of the Second Chorus, in his physician's office, keyed a small syringe of a paralytic that would appear, on any post-mortem, to be a cerebral hemorrhage of natural cause. He walked toward the sanctum. Thren of Pale Bark, in his aide's chamber, checked the setting on the ceremonial lance the matriarch had gifted him 12 years earlier. He walked toward the sanctum. They converged on the antechamber. They did not see Len Drake step out of the service door behind them. Len shot Ale of the Second Chorus through the base of the skull with the last tungsten bolt. The physician folded forward without a sound. The syringe hit the floor and rolled. Thren of Palebark did not turn. Thren of Palebark had been trained in the matriarch's guard for 18 years before he had become a diplomatic aide, and he knew what a body sounded like when it fell. Thren of Palebark spun. The ceremonial lance came up in the trained double grip of a court officer. The lance was not a plasma weapon, it was a kinetic weapon, an ancient one, powered by a magnetic accelerator that flung a barbed rod at close to the same velocity as a Terran tungsten bolt. It was the one weapon in the sanctum that could kill Len Drake at the range Len Drake was now standing. Thren fired it point-blank into Len's chest. The barb hit him just under the collarbone, punched through the muscle, and buried itself in the doorframe behind him. Sael, watching from the command post, made a sound. Len went to one knee. The lance's charging cycle showed 3 seconds on the indicator ring of the shaft. Len looked up. He met Thren of Palebark's eyes. He said, "You've got 3 seconds." Then he stood up, off the barb, ripping the flange out through his own shoulder blade in a single motion, and closed the 2 strides between them in 1.5. Thren of Palebark had time to get the lance halfway up. The axe went once, it did not go twice. Thren of Palebark stood for a very long moment with the axe head buried between his neck and his shoulder, and then he folded in stages the way a court official fell only when there was truly nothing left of the office to hold him up. Len set his boot on Thren's chest and pulled the axe free. Vess of the long silence, watching from the wardrobe door, turned and ran. He got 4 paces down the corridor before the folding knife hit him in the base of the spine. Len walked after him. He picked the knife out of the wardrobe master's back. He knelt beside him. He said quietly, close to the man's ear, "The client, name." Vess of the long silence said the name. It was a name Sile, at the command post, recognized. It was a name that within one full cycle was going to end a very old career and start a very quiet succession purge that would keep the diplomatic core of the sovereignty honest for the next generation. Len straightened up. He walked to the sanctum door. He knocked twice with his knuckles. He said, "Ma'am, it's Drake. Interior is clear." There was a long pause behind the door. Then Princess Yihara opened it. She was standing in the door in her sleep robes, without her attendants, without her lacquer, without her cords tuned. She was, for the first time in her adult life, seeing a person from another species who had just killed 35 men for her. And she did not have a script. She looked at Len Drake. She looked at the blood soaking through his fatigues. She looked at the flange still sticking out of his shoulder blade, at the bandaged tourniquet on his thigh, at the axe hanging from his hand, at the way he was leaning on the doorframe because his good leg had, at some point in the last 90 seconds, stopped being good. She said, in the softest chord Sale had ever heard from her, "Sergeant." Len straightened, as much as a man in his condition could straighten. "Ma'am, you should have died on that platform." Len considered that. "Ma'am," he said, "the door was locked. I couldn't come in, so I stayed." The princess did not know what to do with that. She looked down at her hands. She said, "Why?" "Ma'am," Len said, "you told me to. It was my post." She looked up. "I locked you out to die." "Ma'am," Len said, "you locked the door. That's what a locked door means. I wasn't going to open it from your side." The princess was silent for a moment. Then she said, "The other 3. "Down, ma'am. All 3. The client. Marshal Sale has the name. She'll know what to do with it." The princess looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Sergeant Drake, sit down. You're bleeding on the sanctum floor." Len sat down. He sat down, in fact, rather more quickly than he had planned to. Sael, from the command post, keyed the medical wing. Then she reached into her console and pulled up the personnel file she had made of Len Drake 8 days earlier in the quiet chamber of the intelligence wing. She looked at the line at the top of the assessment. Assessed threat profile. Culturally archaic, operationally negligible. She reached for her data crystal. She crossed out the line. She wrote nothing beneath it. She stared at the blank space for a long time. She did not know what to write instead. The medical team came in a running formation of 3. They stopped at the sanctum threshold and stared. The senior physician's cord failed her twice before she found the register to say, "Princess, he is bleeding through the marrow." "Then work on the marrow," Yara said, and her voice at that moment sounded a great deal more like her mother's than it usually did. They lifted Len onto a field pallet. He said, in a perfectly conversational tone to the senior physician, "Ma'am, there's an outbound signal that hasn't fired yet. It's the confirmation the client is expecting. If it doesn't fire in the next 3 minutes, they'll know the job failed. If it fires with the wrong data, they'll come back with a fleet cutter and finish the job themselves. There are 12 minutes of storm cover left. That's enough for a cutter to reach the citadel." The senior physician looked at him as one looks at a patient whose brain has been disarranged by blood loss. "Sergeant, please, do not speak." "Marshal Sale," Len said calmly, over the medic's shoulder into his open channel. "Did Vess of the Long Silence set the outbound signal on his own console, or on a shared node?" Sael, at the command post, was already checking. Shared node. Third sanctum data well. That's a cord node. I can't sing to it, you have to. Sael was already at the console. What do I sing? Sing the confirmation. Wrong prefix. Send it to the client on the client's own private prefix instead of the matriarch's forgery. When they receive a confirmation from their own real address, they'll know their operation is compromised in-house, and they'll withdraw the cutter and go to ground for the next cycle. That's the time we need for the diplomatic corps to purge the faction quietly. Sael's cord took a beat to catch up to the elegance of the maneuver. Then she sang. She sang the confirmation on the wrong prefix, in the client's own house cadence, timed exactly to the 12th mark of the storm. 6 long seconds passed. The atmospheric reader chirped once. A cutter engine, 3 light minutes out, spun down its approach vector. The storm continued to howl. There was, from that moment on, no fleet within striking distance. The senior physician, with the expression of a woman who had begun the evening arranging inventory and was now watching her civilization pivot on a stretcher, said, "Sergeant, may I please close your artery?" "Yes, ma'am," Len said. "Thank you." He closed his eyes. Sael left the command post at the 14th mark of the storm and walked, alone, through corridors she had walked 10,000 times and did not recognize any of them. She walked to the sanctum wing. She walked past the bodies of Vess of the Long Silence and Thren of Pale Bark and Ale of the second chorus, and did not slow. She walked past the medical team wheeling Lendrake down the long service ramp toward the intensive wing. She walked past the princess, still standing in her sleep robes in the sanctum doorway, and the princess did not stop her. She walked to her own office. She sat at her own desk. She reopened his personnel file. She read it this time without the tone of a court cataloguer. She read it the way one read a letter from someone who had done a hard, quiet thing for a long time without ever asking to be thanked for it. She read the deployments. She read the second Boreal citation. She read the emergency contact line and the payroll allocation and the note from the examining physician. She did the math she had been unwilling to do earlier. 60% of a Marine sergeant's pay allocated to a nurse's aide in Shaft 17 of Kepler's Reach for 9 years. That was, at Terran Concord scale, a very small fortune. It was not enough to buy a house on any core world. It was, however, exactly enough to keep a chronically ill child in the only medical facility available on a Category 2 mining colony in indefinite treatment for the projected lifetime of the treatment. Sael sat with that. She reached for the archive channel. She sent a private request on her own credentials to Terran Concord Public Records. Query: Kepler's Reach, Shaft 17. Any and all records associated with the surname Drake in the last 12 cycles. The answer came back in 11 seconds. Emma Drake, born Kepler's Reach, deceased age 29, ore collapse incident Shaft 17. Survived by 1 child, gender female, condition. Chronic marrow disorder, requires monthly transfusion, treatment costs beyond family means. Adopted at request of surviving sibling by neighboring family, guardianship registered. Financial support, monthly stipend, source, brother, Sergeant Len Drake, Terran Concord 2nd Expeditionary. Sael read the record twice. Emma Drake had been dead for 9 years. The 60% had never been going to Emma. The 60% had been going to Emma's child, whose name was not in the record because the record was not authorized to name minors, and whose treatment would run, if projections held, for the rest of her natural life. Len Drake was the emergency contact of a woman who had been dead for 9 years because he could not bring himself to change the paperwork, because that was still the address of his sister's grave. Sael closed her eyes. She sat with her forearms flat against the surface of her desk for a long, long time. When she opened her eyes again, the storm was breaking. The eastern sky had gone from black to the grey of an old blade. It was almost dawn. She stood up. She went to the outer parapet, alone, because it was the thing that needed doing. The storm's tail dragged its last wall of rain across the parapet as Sail stepped through the outer gate. The gate itself was still dented from the outside, where the assassins had tried, at some point in the small hours, to force it. The dent was a shallow bowl, the depth of a Vrethai fist. The gate had held. She stood on the platform in her intelligence marshal's grey, in the grey of the last of the storm, and she counted. The bodies were arranged the way a working man leaves his tools, not stacked, not hidden, not artfully arranged, simply set aside out of the way of the next task. Some of them had been rolled to the seaward edge of the parapet to give Len room to move. Some of them had been pulled clear of the door. Some of them lay where they had fallen and had not moved since. She counted them the first time and stopped at 32. She counted them again because 32 did not match the number in her head. She counted them a third time. She stopped at 32 again. She stood for a long moment, looking at that number. Then she remembered there had been 3 inside. She had counted only the outside. She said aloud to nobody, 35. She walked the parapet slowly in the fine mist. She looked at each body in turn. She noted, without wanting to note, the manner of each death. The tungsten bolts had gone through shielding, through helmets, through the base of skulls at range. The axe had gone through necks, through collarbones, through the joint of shoulder to arm. The folding knife had gone through spines and under jaws. The short sword he had pulled out of his own forearm had gone through 3 of them, right through the seam of their armor at the hip, the way a man opens a fish. There were, in every case, the marks of a workman who had learned his trade in a place where nothing forgave the second attempt. Sael thought about Kepler's reach and its 1.4 gravity, and its oar lifts, and the 15-year-old who had run them. She thought about a shift that ended with a cave-in, and a sister named Emma, and a child in the only clinic there was. She thought about the treaty, and the 12 human colony worlds, and the person whose name Vess of the long silence had spoken with the last breath of a spine that would not carry him another step. She thought about the diplomatic corps and what the next cycle was going to look like when she and the matriarch sat down together in the winter court and quietly, carefully, name by name, dismantled the faction that had done this. She thought about the human in the intensive wing 3 levels down, unconscious, with 16 units of Vrethai-compatible plasma running into a vein in his forearm and a tube down his throat. She thought about what she was going to write on the assessment line of his file. She had not decided yet. She turned and walked back through the dented gate. She left the storm's last mist to carry the smell of iron and salt out to sea. The matriarch arrived on the private flight from the winter court at the 4th hour past dawn. She came without ceremony because the matriarch had raised a daughter in the sanctum of the Crimson Citadel and had certain instincts about certain kinds of weather. She came with 2 of her closest chorus, and with the ceremonial guard of 6 she took nowhere else, and with the small private physician who had attended her since she herself had been a hatchling. She spent 9 minutes in the sanctum with her daughter. Nobody heard what was said in those 9 minutes. Yara emerged with her lacquer redone and her cords tuned and her sleep robes traded for court blue. And there was something in the way she held her chin that had not been there the day before. The matriarch spent the next 40 minutes in the intelligence wing with Sael, going line by line through the report Sael had compiled at her console in the darkest quarter of the storm. She did not sing while she read. When she finished, she looked at Sael for a long, quiet moment and said, "Marshal, bring me the human when he wakes. The court will convene at the 16th mark. I will address him from the throne." Sael inclined her cords in the ancient reply. "Sovereign." The matriarch paused at the door. She said, "Marshal, what is his name?" Len Drake, sovereign. The matriarch tried it, the way she tried all foreign names once before using them in public, to be sure her chords would not shame the speaker. Len Drake, she said. She said it with only the faintest embarrassment. She said it, in fact, with more dignity than any Vrethe had ever managed the word. Len Drake woke at the 11th mark. He asked first for water. He asked second for the location of his boots. He asked third when he could get up. The physician told him that in Vrethe medical convention, a man who had lost the volume of blood he had lost was permitted to get up when the physician told him he could get up, which would be, at earliest, in 3 days. Len said, "Ma'am, with respect. In Terran convention, a man who has lost the volume of blood I have lost is permitted to get up when the person he protects is on the way to see him." The physician was going to answer. She saw the princess walking down the corridor toward the door. She closed her mouth. Yara came in alone. She sat on the low stool the physician kept for her own use. She did not speak for a moment. Then she said, "Sergeant Drake, the matriarch is convening the court in 4 hours. She will address you from the throne. She intends to offer you a formal title in the Sovereignty Honor Guard, first rank, permanent post at whatever citadel you choose." Len considered this. "Ma'am," he said, "may I say no?" Yara did not seem surprised. "You may." "Then, respectfully, ma'am, no." Yara was silent for a moment. Then she said, "May I ask why?" Len considered. "Ma'am," he said, "my sister's daughter has a marrow disorder. She needs a transfusion every 4th week. She's 10 years old. The clinic on Kepler's Reach is a hut. If I take a permanent post here, I lose my Terran Concord pay grade because the treaty makes me your soldier instead of mine. And if I lose the pay grade, the clinic on Kepler's Reach can't afford the transfusions, and the girl dies. Ma'am." Yara looked at him for a long time. She said, "Sergeant, if I doubled the pay grade from the Sovereign Treasury, if I paid for the girl's transfusions personally from my own private house in a cord that cannot be recalled, if I sent a Vrethe physician to Kepler's Reach at sovereign expense to attend her weekly, if I built a hospital on Kepler's Reach with my name over the door, would you take the post?" Len considered this too. "Ma'am," he said, "if you did all of that for a girl who is not your subject on a rock that is not your world, because of a debt to a man who was doing his job, then you would deserve the title you were offering me too much for me to accept it. Because the moment I take the honor guard post, I stop being a man doing his job, and I become a man cashing in a favor, and the girl deserves a better provider than a man who cashes in favors. Ma'am." The princess sat with that for a very long time. She said in a very quiet chord, "I locked you out to die because I was told you were a spy. I would like to have said before that I would not have done so had I not been told, but that is a thing I cannot know. What I know is that when I did lock the door, you stayed on the outside of it, and that is a thing I did not deserve." "Ma'am," Len said, "the door was locked. It's not complicated. For you, perhaps, it is not." Yara stood. "I will speak with my mother. The transfusions will be paid regardless of the post. The hospital will be built regardless of the post. This will not be a favor. It will be a treaty amendment. It will be a matter of state. It will be signed by the sovereign of the Vrethe, and it will not be revocable. And you will not owe me a thing for it, because a queen who has to be owed for keeping a child alive is not a queen." Len looked at her. He said, "Ma'am, thank you." Ihara nodded. She turned to the door. At the door, she stopped. She said, without turning around, "Sergeant, was there anything else? Anything at all?" Len thought about it. He said, "Ma'am, yes. Does anyone in this citadel know how to make real coffee?" The princess did not turn around for a full 3 heartbeats. Then she turned around slowly, and Sael, who was watching from the corridor, saw, for the first time in 12 years of service, Princess Yara of the Crimson Citadel laugh. It was a small laugh. It was not a Vrethai laugh. It was a laugh that had been picked up unconsciously from a species she did not respect. Watching a species she did not respect do a job she had not thought her own species could do. She said in careful, unmusical Terran standard, "Sergeant, I will find someone." She left the room. The court convened at the 16th mark. Len Drake walked into the throne hall on his own 2 legs, with the wound in his thigh strapped, and the wound in his shoulder strapped, and the short sword punch in his forearm strapped, and one of the physician's people at each elbow, in case any of the straps decided not to. He wore the same fatigues he had worn on the parapet, because the Sanctum Wardrobe Master was recently deceased, and none of the junior staff had presumed to dress him without permission. He did not bow. He did not seem to know he was expected to. The matriarch on the throne looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up. The court gasped, because in 6 centuries the matriarch of the Vrethai had stood from her throne in the presence of a foreign soldier exactly 0 times. She descended the 3 steps of the dais. She stopped in front of Len Drake, and she did the small, formal gesture that a Vrethai chief offers to an ally of equal house. And she said, in the ancient chord, "Sergeant Len Drake, the House of the Crimson Citadel owes you a daughter. The House of the Winter Court owes you a sovereign. The Vrethai sovereignty owes you a treaty. In the ancient way, an ally of equal house is bound to us, and we to him for the whole of his life. In the ancient way, we lower ourselves in acknowledgement. In the ancient way, we ask you what you require." Len considered this. He said quietly, "Ma'am, I don't need a title. I do have a niece. Your daughter has already spoken to me about her. I'd be grateful if the treaty amendment your daughter proposed went through, because I'd like to sleep at night knowing my niece has a doctor. Beyond that," he paused, "beyond that, Sovereign, I'd like a real cup of coffee, and I'd like to go home for a couple of weeks and see the girl. And when the couple of weeks are up, I'd like to come back and sit at that outer gate for as long as the treaty says I have to, in the same fatigues, at the same post, without a title, because the last time I sat there something bad happened, and I'd like to be there the next time, in case something bad happens again." The court did not know what to do with that. The matriarch did. The matriarch who had raised a daughter and lost a husband and buried a great many things over the course of 600 years, and who had come to understand that dignity was not a thing you gave to people, but a thing you noticed in them, inclined her chords in a chord no Vrethai had ever offered a foreigner. She said in the ancient tongue, "Then let it be so. The gate is yours. The niece is ours. The coffee we will invent. Go home. Come back when you are ready." Sale, standing at the far edge of the throne hall in her intelligence marshal's grey, felt something in her throat do something for which her language did not have a word. The court did not applaud. The Vrethai did not applaud. What the court did was, all together, in the smallest, most private chord any of them ever gave, briefly, the ancient acknowledgement chord for an ally of equal house. The chord filled the hall for the space of one breath. Then it was gone. Len Drake, who could not hear it because his species did not have the necessary ears, nodded politely to the sovereign and walked out of the throne hall on his own 2 legs to go find his boots. Sael went back to her office at the end of that long day. The matriarch's flight had departed. The princess had retired to the sanctum. The bodies on the parapet had been carted away by a discreet formation of the Citadel's engineers. The dent in the outer gate had been left on Sael's private order, unrepaired. The dent was going to stay in the door of the Crimson Citadel until the Citadel itself fell, because the door was going to remember what it had held. Sael sat at her desk. She opened the personnel file for the 4th time. The blank line at the top of the assessment still waited for her. She thought about it for a long time. She thought about the 15-year-old who had run oar lifts. She thought about the sister whose name he could not bring himself to erase. She thought about the niece in the shaft. She thought about the door. She reached for her data crystal. She did not know, when she began, what she was going to write. She wrote in the code that intelligence marshals used only for the highest classification of subject, only 3 words: alley of house. She closed the file. She sat at her desk for a while longer. Outside her window, the last of the storm's cloud lifted from the sea. The eastern sky went from grey to a pale, cold gold. In the medical wing, 3 levels down, Len Drake was, at that moment, drinking his first cup of coffee in 9 days. It was, by any honest measure, terrible coffee. It had been made by a Vrethai kitchen apprentice from ground husks of a black-roasted seed the Sanctum Garden had begrudgingly grown from a single Terran cutting, and it tasted, Len would later say, like a solvent that got promoted. He drank it in silence, without a word of complaint, because it was hot and it was his, and a princess had ordered it made. Asael, at her window, in the last of the storm's light, did the small, quiet thing a Vrethai marshal did at the end of a long night, when the shape of the world had been changed slightly, and only 3 or 4 people would ever know why. She hummed under her breath the ancient acknowledgement chord of an ally of equal house. Then she went home. At dawn the next morning, when the sun cleared the eastern gulf and the citadel began, in its slow, ceremonial way, to wake, Sail walked past the outer gate on her way to duty. The dent was still there. The gate was still closed. Beyond the gate, on the platform where 32 men had died in a single storm, the last of the salt mist was lifting from the wet stone. At the outer gate there was no guard. The next rotation had not yet begun. The treaty had not yet been signed with its amendment. The hospital on Kepler's Reach had not yet been built. But at the outer gate there was a dent and a door, and behind the door a citadel, and inside the citadel a princess, and inside the princess the beginning of an idea that had not existed in the Vrethai for 600 years. That a locked gate was a locked gate regardless of who had done the locking or from which side. And that sometimes, on the other side of it, there would be a man in patched fatigues with an axe from a colony no one could find on a star map, who would stand at that gate simply because it was the gate, and simply because he had been told to stand, and simply because a girl in a shaft 10 light-years away needed him to. Sail walked past the gate. She did not stop. She did not look through it. She did not need to. What a journey. What a stand at the gate. The truest weapon in the galaxy is not the one that shines the brightest. It is the one that keeps standing when the shine has gone out, at a locked door in a storm, because somebody at home is counting on you. If you love stories like this one, drop a like right now. It is what keeps these tales in the air. Share it with anyone you know who loves sci-fi about a human against the impossible. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next HFY epic. And tell me in the comments, would you have hired Len Drake to train your own army, or would you have taken the coffee and gone home to your niece? Keep watching the empty dark out there. Keep looking to the stars.